Hi, we are recording about the executive branch today. This is just a brief overview. We don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of how the election works and all of that. This is just an overview into how the executive branch is supposed to work. This is an election year, and this has been somewhat of an unusual 4 years in the White House. So I kind of want to take things back to what the Constitution actually says and how the executive branch historically has functioned. So the executive branch is not just the president. The executive branch is the president, the vice president, the first lady, or first gentleman one of these days, cabinet, departments, agencies, right? It's actually most of the government you actually interact with. Department of Education is under the executive branch. Department of Transportation, like the MTA, that's under the executive branch. Law enforcement, executive branch. So most of what people think of in their day-to-day lives as government is usually part of the executive branch. So the vice president is a backup for the president. Now, the president's role is not to do whatever he wants, and it's not powerless either. It is highly influential. So while the legislative branch writes the laws, it's the executive branch that signs those into law. It's the executive branch that actually puts those laws into practice. So, for example, looking at cell phone policy, right? Cell phone policy, in chancellor's regulations, those chancellor's regulations are like the legislative branch, right? You're not supposed to have your phone in the classroom, but different places put that policy into practice in different ways. Some schools won't even allow their students to bring their phones into the school. Other places like ours, you can bring them in, but they're going to be securely locked while they're here, so you can't access it. Other schools might be like, yeah, just, tuck it into your purse or, into your bag and just, try not to take it out during class, right? So the way in which rules are written and the way in which rules are implemented are also not always the same thing. Implementation of laws also has to do with how laws are enforced, right? So not just laws being put into practice, but also how are laws enforced and who are they enforced against? Are they being enforced equally throughout our society? Those are things that fall underneath the executive branch. So the president gets power by the Constitution, and the president takes an oath. Every president takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution, because that is the foundation of our government. Okay. The president is the head of state, right? The president is the face of our nation abroad. And the president also is a very influential position in that they are the commander in chief of the armed forces. So when you think of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, right, the Marines, you can have four-star generals who are in charge, but they still report to somebody else. And that's the president. The president is actually the ultimate leader of all branches of the military. That is a very powerful and influential position. Okay, so the president implements laws and the president enforces laws, right? The executive branch does both of those things. The executive branch also appoints the heads of the federal agencies, including the cabinet. So no president is expected to know everything about everything. That's just not realistic. But the president does have advisors who specialize in certain topics where they're supposed to be very, very knowledgeable about certain topics. So if something happens, the president can turn to those individuals for their special knowledge. If there's a hurricane that hits Florida, the president can turn to the Department of Education to find out, like, are schools being flooded? Do they need to be closed down? Because of the hurricane. The Department of Transportation to see how the hurricane impacts railroads and roads and airlines and cruise ships and all of those things, right? Turns to the Department of Agriculture to see what the impact of a hurricane is on the citrus groves, right? you know, so on and so forth. You get the idea. So those cabinet positions are incredibly powerful. The departments, their specialties, are underneath the leadership of those cabinet officials. And those cabinet officials really kind of decide how things are going to be carried out, what rules are going to be enforced, what rules are not going to be enforced. And as we all know from cell phone policy, and those of you who have been in my classroom before, right, rules are meaningless without enforcement. If I didn't make you guys, before we did the locking pockets last year, if I didn't make you guys keep your phones put away, they would have been in your hands. But you don't bring it out in my classroom because I enforce it. So if rules aren't enforced, people tend not to follow them. Okay. So in front of you are the only 3 qualifications for the presidency. These are the only 3 things that are actually required by the Constitution. Everything else is negotiable. You have to be at least 35 years of age. You have to be a natural born citizen. And you have to have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. So a natural born citizen means somebody who is born with their citizenship, not somebody who acquires or gains citizenship. And this was put into the Constitution to try to avoid people who might have divided loyalties getting into positions of great power in our government. It's supposed to limit the ability of other nations to control our government. And as we all know, the president is not directly elected by the people. Hillary Clinton won the last election based off of the popular vote. However, Donald Trump won the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is what actually decides who wins the election. Okay? The Electoral College and the popular vote has a disconnect. And that disconnect happens partially because people don't fill out the census. So when I keep telling you guys over and over and over again how important the census is, this is one of the reasons why the census is so important. People might register to vote, but they don't fill out their census. So that means you have more voters than there are representatives for those voters. The census is what actually determines how many representatives each state has in the Electoral College. So when people only partially engage in the democratic process, it kind of has negative consequences. Now, there are other reasons as well for why there's a disconnect. The fact that people are far more mobile these days and move, and they're not necessarily staying in one place for 10 years and, you know, that sort of thing. But a big chunk of it is people are not engaged in the process of filling out the census. So when something, you know, like 2016 happens, you can actually have a winner that is, you know, not going to end up in office, or somebody who wins the popular vote, but they don't win the electoral vote. And that has happened actually more often in recent history. So yes, it's incredibly important for you to register to vote and to show up and to go vote. It is also incredibly important that that census gets filled out. Okay. Now, there are, or at least there were, a couple states, there have been some changes in the last couple years that I need to verify, but there were a couple states where, you know, it was winner take all, and the electoral, or divided, and the Electoral College, the way in which they give their votes is not the same from state to state. So you have some states which is, you know, winner take all. You have some states where it's, you know, if you won 60% of the vote in our state, you're going to get 60% of the electoral votes. And now you have some states who have actually changed their laws. So whoever wins the popular vote gets their state's electoral votes. Okay, so the process is ever evolving, and it can be changed also and adjusted within the laws of the individual state. So a state cannot impact how many electoral votes it gets, but a state can, through its legislative process, impact how those electoral votes are assigned. Okay, I think that's the clearest way that I can think of to explain it. So the cabinet, I already said the cabinet advises the president on certain topics, and the cabinet, oh, and I think I need to update this. There might be more than 15 now. The cabinet also takes care of the day-to-day stuff. President Trump is not checking in on educational policy every single day. Betsy DeVos is theoretically supposed to be doing that. It's the Department of Education that kind of puts all of those things into practice. Okay. One of the things I do want to mention, though, is, in the last 4 years, this presidency has been very tumultuous and divisive. Okay. And I have heard, even from some of you guys, the comment of, that's not my president. And I had heard that same comment on much rarer occasions, but I heard it during the previous administration, during the Obama administration. I want to make it clear. When somebody is elected to office, they do not just represent the people who voted for them. When somebody is elected to office, they do not just, help the people that like them and that they like, right? It's not about that. Elected office is a sacred trust. And that sacred trust is between the public, the constituency, and the representative. And that representative represents everybody. Okay, absolutely everybody. That representative has a responsibility and a requirement to represent everybody in their constituency. Doesn't matter if they voted for them or not. And I personally don't believe in releasing any representative from their responsibility to represent everyone. So whether it's the presidency or a Senate or a mayor or a city council person or whatever, I reject the idea of that's not my, because their responsibility is always and to everyone. And they should not be let off the hook of that responsibility. It is our job to become more connected with government. It is our job to become more involved, more knowledgeable, more educated, and far more watchful. And I'll say it before, I've said it before, and I'll say it again and again and again. We have rights and we have responsibilities, right? It's like any social contract. There are rights and there are responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities of the public is to pay attention to what its government is doing. And one of the responsibilities of the government and the executive branch, since that's what we're talking about today, is to represent all the people, not just the ones they want to. That is where I am going to stop for today. And coming up next, we are going to pick up more on that idea of social contract. Okay, bye.